Hi, this is another video by PetRock. I'm working on my '03 Dodge Durango 4.7 liter, and today we're going to be changing the transmission fluid and the transmission filters. There are two in this transmission. Specifically, this transmission is a 545 RFE. Hopefully, I can give you guys some tips along the way to make this job easier. Sometimes doing transmissions is fairly messy job, and hopefully I'll be able to make it so that show you how to do it so you don't actually spill a drop on the floor. This truck does not come with a drain plug for the transmission. So the way the manual says to do it is to basically drop the pan and just basically try to spill the oil out of the pan as you're lowering it. Anybody who's tried to do that, it's not very simple. It's a balancing act, and oftentimes you end up spilling most of the fluid on yourself, the floor, or and hardly any of it in the pan, in the drain pan. So a better way I've come up with is to actually use a suction pump. So instead of getting the fluid out by dropping the pan, you suck the fluid out through the transmission fill tube first. That'll get most of the fluid out, and then once you've got the most of the fluid out, you can drop the pan and have maybe a quart left in the pan, not very much at all. So you don't have to worry about balancing it and spilling it on yourself and stuff like that. So anyway, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my suction pumps and we'll get to it. I've covered up my air filter with a towel. I brought up a nice catch pan, and here's the suction pump that I'll be using. I picked this up at a local auto parts store. I think it was like $5 or $10. I bought it a while ago, so I don't remember the exact price anymore. Anyway, so the outlet is the bottom part, the inlet is the top part on this pump. So I basically shove the outlet into the catch pan, shove the inlet down the filler tube as far as it'll go. That's it. And then just basically pump. So the bubbles you hear now are just the air being sucked up. So if you watch, let me see if I can get this without splattering it everywhere. Yeah, it's just sucking up air. Now I just got to pull out the hose as carefully as possible without getting oil everywhere. Tear down my catch can, and now I go underneath the car, underneath the truck, start unbolting the transmission pan. Most of the fluid is now out of the transmission. Took less than a minute to do, and hopefully it'll save me a lot of mess. Okay, here we are underneath the truck. I've put it on ramps just for simplicity. Here's the transmission pan. Here's the exhaust. There's the main oil drain plug. Anyway, so basically right now there should be very little fluid left in here because we sucked it all out. A long time ago I had installed an oil drain plug just to make my life easier. You can pick these up at most auto parts stores. They're just universal. They're basically just a bolt with a hole in it and a little plug. So you can just install it whenever you want. You don't have to. The suction method gets most of the fluid out, although there still is about a quart or so in the pan. Okay, so I got my catch pan underneath the drain plug, and I'm going to just remove it. I don't expect a lot of oil to come out, but you never know. So there's still a little bit coming out, and I'm just going to wait for it to finish draining. So I'll be right back. Okay, so it stopped draining. As I said earlier, only about a quart came out, so it only really drained for like maybe 30 seconds to a minute. Anyway, so then so now I've replaced the O-ring on the end of this plug. I just put it back in. So now that it's plugged up, we can start undoing all these bolts here. They are 15/16 15/16 or an 8mm. The 15/16 fits a little bit better. An 8mm will do if you in a pinch. Anyway, so you want to undo all the ones in the front and leave 2 of them in the back partially undone. So like maybe halfway out or so. The whole point is so that when we pry it open, we want the pan to drop this way first, and any fluid that's still in the pan, which there shouldn't be now because I drained it. But for those of you who don't have a drain plug, there's still going to be about a quart of fluid in the pan. So you want to drop the front first, and if there is any fluid still in the pan, then you can then it'll spill out the front, and you can catch it in a catch can. I don't have a catch pan that is big enough to cover this entire pan. So what I do is I go out and I get a wow, that was loud. I get a turkey baster pan from the local shopping mall, local supermarket, and just flatten the edges a little bit to make it wider, and that fits pretty much perfectly underneath this transmission pan. The entire contents of the transmission pan will fit in there. So this is easier than using a drain pan that only fits half of it, because you're bound to spill something that way. Anyway, so use a little aluminum pan like this with a larger metal pan. This is just a pan you can pick up at your local auto parts store or whatever. I use one of these underneath my grill to protect the deck, but you can also use this for automotive reasons, like I'm doing here. Anyway, so you large pan underneath and a catch pan, and start undoing the bolts. Okay, so I've got the all the bolts undone. I left this one in just a couple threads, and this one and this one over here are undone about halfway. Now the reason I left this one in a couple threads was so that when the pan does drop a little bit, it's not going to drop completely, and it won't bend the pan on this side. It's just a little bit of a safety precaution. Anyway, so now that the pan is done, the only thing that's holding it in is holding it onto the transmission is the RTV that was put on there previously. So it comes from the factory with RTV, and the previous couple times I've done this job, I did it with RTV as well, and it seems to work really well. Recently, or relatively recently, the Fel-Pro has come out with a nice rubber gasket, or a rubber-ish gasket for this application, and so I picked it up, and I'm going to try to use it this time and see how it goes. But anyway, so now you just got to try to pry into the pan to get the to disconnect the RTV. Okay, it's been a couple days since I last recorded. It is the holidays after all, so last point I was at was basically getting the pan off. I also, in a moment of stupidity, bent the pan a little bit. As you can see right here, it's a little bit distorted. That's not horrible. I can bang that back out again. If it's not the end of the world, just try to avoid doing that as much as you can. So if you followed the steps I suggested in the beginning of the video and sucked as much of the fluid out as you could before even starting on the pan, there should be maybe 1 or 2 quarts left in the pan. Basically whatever in this section here, maybe a little bit more. And that'll and once you drop the pan, a little may spill out, but not nearly as much as it would if you didn't suck out the oil initially. The oil, when it's at normal full level, is way above, like way up here. That's where the oil level is compared to the bottom of the oil pan. So just do the math and you'll figure it out that it's easier just to suck it out first, or install a drain plug and just drain it. Alright, so I positioned my pan underneath the transmission as well as possible, as well as can be, I should say, and then I Now if this pan was full of oil as I'm trying to do this, it would be sloshing all over the place. I would be coated in oil right now. But thankfully it's not. So now I can wiggle it a little bit to clear the back and drop the pan. As you can see, this whole area is still covered in oil, and even though it's been actually drained for a couple days. So you be wary of that. Make sure you have a big enough pan like I suggested. So here's the transmission pan down. Just wanted to let you see that there's still a good amount of oil in there, even with my drain plug. I probably could have drained it a little bit more before I dropped it, but still, there's still a good amount in there. So as you can see, it's still dripping, even though this has technically been drained for a couple days. So next, I'm going to basically try to get as much of this gasket off as possible, make it as smooth a surface as possible. First, I like to get all the big chunks of gasket off. I usually use a nice big paint scraper to scrape as much of the old gasket off as possible before getting any deeper and using a razor blade or whatever. I use just a big paint scraper. It gets all the big chunks off first. I use a little bit of get that in camera, a little gasket remover made by Permatex. This stuff is pretty nasty stuff. It actually, if you look, it's actually corroded the can where it's actually sprayed out of this thing. So yeah, you don't want to get the stuff on you. It will actually burn your skin if you leave it on there too long, and it stinks to high heaven. Anyway, so you want to do this in a well-ventilated area. You want to keep this stuff obviously away from pets and kids and whatnot. But anyway, so you apply this stuff in a nice bead around the gasket, where the gasket was, I should say. Try to avoid getting it into the transmission area itself if you can. Maybe use a piece of cardboard or your hand to block it. I'll be using a piece of cardboard, and apply a nice even coat. Let it sit for a couple minutes. Come back. It'll turn the RTV into a goop that you can literally scrape off with the paint scraper, like I was showing before. So here's the transmission pan. Here's the drain plug that I installed a few years back. As you can see, it's not flush with the bottom of the pan, so there would still be a little bit of level of oil in it if I let it drain all the way. Right here is the magnet at the bottom of the pan that's designed to pick up any metal fragments. Right now, if you look at it, there's a little film of black stuff on top of it. That's normal and expected. That's the clutch plate material from inside the transmission. Don't worry about that. If you see metal chunks or big metal or metal flakes, like glitter, a glitter type substance in that goop or attached to this magnet, then you probably have some transmission problems that need to be addressed and should probably be addressed shortly. You got metal on metal wearing, and that shouldn't be happening in the transmission, at least not that excessively that it causes chunks to come off. Anyway, so this pan looks pretty good. The magnet is okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that same gasket remover to the outer edge of the pan to get the gasket off of it. So you spray the gasket remover just like before. Just spray it on. Hopefully I'm getting all this in camera because I'm not really looking at the camera screen. So you just spray it on like that, a light coating. Let it sit for about 5 minutes. Make sure your cat doesn't get in it, and then or lick it because it's toxic. There, you just let it sit for about 5-10 minutes, and when you come back, the RTV should be in like a putty form that you can just scrape off with a putty scraper. So I'll be right back. While you wait for the RTV to dissolve, you want to now's a good time to clean up and inspect the bolts that you took out of for the transmission pan. If you see that little nub on the top right there, you don't want that on the bolt, because if that bolt bottoms out, then this will compress, and then it'll cause extra force onto the threads that the bolt is trying to go into, and you can easily strip out your bolts, strip out the bolt holes. The body of the transmission is made of aluminum, and these are some stiffer metal. I'm not really sure what, probably steel. So you want to make sure that that they're as clean as possible and there's no obstructions in the way. So you just take a wire brush. I like to use a pair of vice grips to hold on to the nut, or bolt I should say, and just work around it. Get as much of the crap and oil as you can off. That one, there you go. Then just wipe it off. There, now you can see that one's nice and clean, and that one's ready to go. So I can put that aside and work on the next one. Now enough time has passed for the RTV to dissolve. So now I just take a nice paint scraper, like this one, and just scrape as much of the big stuff off as you can. Like that. It should come off fairly easily. The big stuff will tend to be around the edges. As you see, it comes off pretty simple, pretty easily, I should say, with just a simple paint scraper. So once you get the big stuff off, then you go back with a razor blade style, style scraper, and just scrape the remaining stuff off, making sure not to cut yourself in the process. You may need to apply multiple coats of that chemical, especially to get into these little grooves right here, because it's they were probably covered by others. But I like to take the corner of my, I don't know if you can see that, but you take the corner of the scraper and just gouge it in there, and it'll scrape the stuff right out. So you just do that all the way around the entire perimeter of the pan, and do the same thing to the transmission, and making sure that not to gouge the transmission pan or the transmission housing as you're doing it. If you do, if you do gouge it a little bit, you can get some emery cloth and smooth it out, and then a couple different grades of sandpaper, like 800 count, 1000 count. That kind of thing, to get rid of the scratch marks that the emery cloth will leave. You want to have the surface as smooth as possible before, so that the gasket has the ability to seal properly. Okay, now that you got the pan not completely clean, but as clean as you can get it with a scraper, take a wire brush and just brush off the remainder of the old RTV until you get down to bare metal. You don't want any of that old RTV on there, because that'll prevent the gasket from sealing properly. So now that it's the outer side scraped, now it's time to clean out the inside of the pan. First thing you want to do is you want to take the magnet out and inspect it and make sure there's no metal chunks in it, like I mentioned before, and then take a can of brake clean and just clean it off like that, and then put it into a rag to wipe the remainder off. Get as much of that gunk, stuff off as possible, so that, and then set it aside. Make sure not to lose this. Make sure not to lose that. You're going to need to install it later. So next you want to take the pan. See if we can get this on camera. Take the pan and spray it down, hose it down, get all the crap and RTV and dirt and gunk and whatever else is in the bottom of the pan out of it. Then take a nice clean rag, wipe it out. In my case, I have a drain plug hole, so I need to open that up as well and clean out any gunk that may have gotten in there. And then we move back to the transmission. You do the same thing for the transmission. Make sure that the outer perimeter of the transmission is nice and clean. Your primary concern with this pan is to make sure, one, that you don't damage it. I've already done that. I gotta clean. I'll fix that up in another video. But also you want to make sure that it's clean. So you don't want any oil on it at all. If there's any oil or transmission fluid on it, the RTV or the gasket won't seal properly. So you, especially the RTV will actually not seal at all, and you'll just get an oil leak. So you want to make sure it's as clean as possible. Okay, now that the transmission is clean, do not forget to put the magnet back in. A lot of people forget to do that, and it causes problems because this magnet, the whole point of the magnet is to pick up any of the clutch material from the inside the transmission, pick it up and basically make it so it doesn't filter through the transmission, making it wear out faster. So make sure to put that magnet back in. Okay, once you've got the pan all clean, you need to move on to the you need to clean off the surface for the mating surface on the actual transmission. Again, just use a nice sharp, preferably new razor blade, paint scraper, maybe a little bristle brush. Make sure not to make it. Don't want a steel brush because then you'll scuff this up. This is just aluminum, so you need to be careful with it. One thing to also take note of while you're cleaning this this surface is check out the holes, each one of these bolt holes. You want to make sure that there's no RTV left over from the previous oil change in there, because if there's RTV inside of there and it's a sealed off hole like these in the back, for example, that RTV will prevent the bolt that you're going to be inserting back into it from tightening down all the way, and that'll basically, a loose bolt is going to be a leaky bolt, so a leaky spot in your transmission pan. So you want to make sure they're nice and clean. Use like a small pick. The gasket remover is also good for this. Just make sure they're nice and clean and there's no RTV blobs inside. Just give you a little bit of layout of the lay of the land. This is one of the primary filter where all the oil is sucked up through in here, and then this is a secondary filter for the oil cooler, the transmission oil cooler that this vehicle is equipped with. I don't know if all vehicles with this same transmission have an oil cooler or not, but this one does, and so it's got a nice screw-on oil filter, similar to like your normal engine oil filter, and also give you more layout. This is the dipstick. This is the oil pan dipstick. So when you're shoving the hose for the pump earlier in the video down into the pan, this is where it was coming out. So one thing to keep note of, this vehicle has actually been sitting here for a good couple weeks because I had some other things come up that needed attention. So it's been sitting here just dripping away. I had my oil pan, I had my giant turkey baster pan underneath it, and it picked up a good amount of oil. So as I was stating, as I was saying, there's oil all over this transmission. Just because you dropped the pan doesn't mean you changed all the oil. There's oil in the torque converter. There's oil in the cooler lines if you have it, in the cooler itself. There's oil pretty much everywhere. It just loves to hide inside of a transmission. That's why these jobs are very messy. And as you can see, there's even some drops that are getting ready to fall, even though this truck's been sitting for a few weeks. So yeah, this is why this job is messy. You want to make sure that you try to limit the amount of mess as possible with like a nice big pan underneath the transmission. Okay, next you remove the main oil filter. There's a single T25 Torx head bolt right here that you just remove. Now be careful because the filter will also be holding fluid in the transmission. So once you remove it from around this point where the inlet to the outlet of the filter is, oil may come out. So make sure you have a catch pan underneath, and it will be a significant amount, like maybe a quart or so. So, but since my truck's been sitting for a while, that fluid may have already drained out. I don't know, but either way, you should be prepared for it. So very, very little came out. But inside the filter, there's still a lot, so also be careful of that. Make sure this goes straight into a catch pan of some form. Now, when this is removed, there should be a little rubber gasket with a metal ring around it at the very tip here. Make sure that it comes out with it, or if not, make sure you go in and get it. It's very important. You'll see that on the replacement filter, there will be it'll either come with a little O-ring gasket for this spot, or it'll already be installed. So here's the new filter that I have. If you notice, it has this metal ring around it, around the top. That's the gasket you need to make sure comes out of the transmission. So to gain access to that little gasket ring, you might find it easier to remove this filter first, so you can come at it from the side. You can use just a regular oil filter wrench, the strap style or this type that I have here. No idea where I got this. I've had it for I don't know how long, and it fits this guy perfectly. But anyway, so just spin it off like a normal oil filter. Again, be prepared for fluid to come out like that. So now that the oil filter's out of the way, you can use some kind of pry device like a screwdriver. I'm actually using a 5/8 open-end wrench, just jamming it in there and dropping it in my oil pan and jamming it back in there, and hopefully not dropping it this time, and leveraging the opposite side to pry it out like that, and dropping it back in the oil pan. So there's not a lot of force behind it, so you just want to make sure that you don't mar up this area right here. The lip of the open-end screwdriver, or sorry, open-end wrench. Wow, the open-end wrench will fit perfectly over it, and you can use it just to pry with. So here are the new transmission filters. Here's the main transmission filter and the transmission cooler filter. The part numbers for the transmission cooler filter is FK-331, and the main one is FK-319. I think I got these from one of my local auto parts stores. I can't remember which one. I tend to go whichever one has the lowest price. Probably like Kragen, O'Reilly, AutoZone, Pep Boys, whatever. Anyone that you get will work just fine. This Power Torque one comes with a little rubber gasket. A little rubber gasket that I am not using. I'm going to be using one made by Fel-Pro. It is part number T0S18733. It's first time I've used this gasket for this transmission, so I can't really say whether it's good or not. It is noticeably thicker than the one that came with the filter, and it also has this coating on it. I'm not really sure what that's for, but anyway, so I like Fel-Pro gaskets. They tend to work well. I haven't had one fail on me yet, knock on a lot of wood. So next what we'll do is we'll pop off this little rubber piece right here, and so you can insert it manually. It's easier to get this in on its own. The reason being is that this is a little bit of a tight press fit, so it's just, yeah, I found it easier to install this separately. It's also how the service manual says to do it. Okay, before you install the seal, you want to take a little bit of transmission fluid and put it up in the bore that that the old one came out of, just to lube it up. And then you want to take a little some more transmission fluid and lube up the entire little gasket thing. Press it in slightly. You'll need to tap it in. I found that a 3/4 socket is perfect for it. So just tap it in slightly. And you'll hear it change once the thing is all the way in, if you notice. So that's all the way in. So now that you have it in, then you take the new filter and take some oil, just like before, and put it around the little nipple thing, and just slide it up in there. It'll you'll see it seat all the way. So once you've done that, then you can get the bolt and tighten it back in to the hole that it came from. So the torque spec for this little bolt is 40 inch-pounds. So I'm using my torque wrench now to torque it down. That's virtually nothing. There. And I dropped the Torx head in the pan. That's awesome. So now that you got that torque down, now you can install the screw-in oil filter. First thing you do, you want to clean off the surface that it's going to be screwing onto, making sure that there isn't any old gasket left over. Then you take, like a normal engine oil filter, you take a little bit of old fluid, and try to get this on camera, and you put it around the rubber O-ring. I also like to put it on the threads just to make it install easier. Since these threads are plastic, it's not really a big issue, but for some filters that are metal, it's good to have a little bit of lubrication in there to prevent it, to make it easier to remove later on. So then you just take it and screw it on in. Once it comes in contact with the top, you like a regular engine oil filter, you just tighten it down an additional half to 3/4 turn. So 1/4, half, 3/4. You don't want to tighten it down so tight that it squishes the rubber O-ring and deforms it, which causes an oil leak. You don't want an internal oil leak in here, because this is trying to do some filtration. If you got a leak in here, if this is leaking into the oil pan, then that's unfiltered oil getting back into the oil pan, and you're basically negating the whole point in having this filter in the first place. So just be careful and install it like I just suggested. It's time to install the pan back on the car. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you don't forget to put the magnet back in. So as you saw in my one of my other videos, where I bent this back into shape after I had bent it taking it out during this job, I got it as smooth as I could, but I couldn't get it perfectly smooth. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but there's a little bit of ripples in the metal right here. And since I'm going to be using this Fel-Pro gasket, I'm afraid that the gasket may not seal properly around this area. So for what I'm going to do is, in the areas where I had to bang on it, which is basically this side here and in here, I'm going to apply a light coat of RTV only on the pan. I'm not going to put it on the transmission. And then it'll be pan, RTV, regular gasket, then transmission. If you don't use one of these gaskets, you would apply a light coat of RTV all the way around the perimeter of the pan. So for those of us who are going to be using a gasket, one of the problems, as you can see, is keeping the gasket in place, because it may have formed whatever way that it was when it came from the factory. The Fel-Pro gasket is kind of cool in that they make the holes slightly smaller than the actual bolt holes. So what that does is you can basically put a bolt in there and it'll hold it in place. So that's what I'm going to do here. It also creates a good sealing surface because it prevents the gasket from leaking around the bolt holes. Now, an alternate approach is if you don't have a gasket that has the smaller size holes, you can use a little bit of string in some strategically placed locations and to hold it in place as you put it up. And once you put it up and get a couple bolts in, you can just cut the string and pull it out, and it'll be, you know, as if it was never there. Another approach is there's some you can get some tacky spray-on stuff, I'm not really sure, glue I guess, that you can spray around the perimeter of the pan to help hold it in place as you're trying to get it up onto the transmission. Okay, so now I'm going to apply the light coat of RTV around here. I prefer Permatex Ultra Black. You can also use the Permatex red kind, what is it? The high temp RTV silicone. Just be careful. It's very sticky. I use rubber gloves whenever I work with RTV, primarily because it is this sticky. It also has you have to put it on fairly quickly. So once you get it on in place, you want to get it mounted to the car and in place within 5 to 10 minutes. You can get by this in smaller tubes. I just happen to pick up a large tube like this. It's easier for me to just use the hand pump rather than the toothpaste tube style or the smaller tube style, which my auto parts store doesn't carry. Anyway, so I'm going to apply a light bead around the perimeter where I know I had been being bad, I guess. Making sure to go around the bolt holes. I don't need to use as much as I would if I was only using RTV, primarily because I also have the regular the gasket over top. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay, so now that I have the RTV down, whether I was going to be using the gasket or not, one of the things I also like to do is I used to take my finger and knead it into place, knead it in like this. What this does is, I'm making sure the holes don't get covered up. What this does is it takes out any air bubbles that may be in the RTV, and also make sure that the RTV gets spread out evenly over the entire gasket surface. Now I just place the gasket, put it in place. The RTV will hold it, but I'm going to put a bolt through anyway. You want to make sure that you don't cover up any of the bolt holes as you're doing this, because that will get shoved up into the holes in the transmission, in the bolt holes in the transmission, which, as I said earlier, you don't want to have RTV inside of. Anyway, so I'm now ready to install this. So yeah, I'm gonna work fast. So once you got the transmission in place, the pan in place, double check that it's nice and clean. You don't want any oil in the in between the gasket and the transmission pan. Anyway, so you get a couple threads on your bolt holes in a couple different spots. Okay, once you've got them all started, you want to tighten them down. Keep going around in the star pattern, similar to how you do on when you're installing a tire. So it appears that my battery died while I was torquing things down. So as you're tightening it, if you're just using pure RTV and you're not using a rubber gasket like I am, you just want to tighten them down until until you start seeing the RTV start to ooze out slightly. It'll just start to bulge out a little bit. At which point you just stop. You don't keep turning. You don't go till it stops. You just stop and just go to the next bolt. Just keep going all the way around until it starts to ooze out. Basically, then you have to just wait. It takes about 5-10 minutes for the RTV to start to cure, and then it takes about an hour for it to set, and to fully dry takes about 24 hours. So according to the RTV bottle, it says that once you've got it to ooze out a little bit, wait about an hour, then turn each bolt about a half turn. And then you're pretty much done. Now you just wait anywhere between 12 and 24 hours for the RTV to cure, and then you put the fluid in. You don't want to put it in before that, because you need to wait for the RTV to dry. Otherwise, you'll cause a leak. With this gasket, as I was saying, I'm using it on the front of the transmission pan to cover up the dimples that I put in when I tried to repair the pan. So with that, I'm also gonna, because of that, I'm gonna have to wait that 12 hours to wait for the RTV to cure. If I didn't have the RTV at all and I was just using a pure gasket, I'd just be able to torque it all down to 105 inch pounds, torque it all down to 105 inch pounds, and then put the oil in, and I'd be good to go. So it's the next day. The RTV has had a chance to fully cure and dry, so now it's time to put the fluid back in the vehicle. It's not just like engine oil where you just dump in the required amount and you're done. You have to go through this procedure to make sure that you add enough fluid and add it properly. The reason for this, at least this is my assumption, is that because the transmission holds so much fluid, and because it likes to hold pockets of fluid in various spots, it's really hard to determine exactly how much fluid is removed every time you drop a pan. I mean, yes, you could measure it out and stuff like that, but that amount that comes out will vary from every oil change, based on the amount of drips that occur. And we saw earlier, like this car's been sitting for quite a while with the pan down, and it was still dripping fluid. So according to the service manual, the first thing you should do is, if you just replace the fluid, the filter and the fluid, your initial amount of oil should be about 10 pints, which is 5 quarts of ATF plus 4 transmission fluid. If you completely disassembled the transmission and allowed the torque converter and everything else to drain out, then you want your initial amount to be 12 quarts. Since I let this sit for so long and so much extra fluid came out, I know I have more than 5 quarts came out because due to what I saw in the pan. And then on top of that, I don't think that the entire thing got completely flushed, all 12 quarts. So I'm gonna put as my initial amount 8 quarts, just to be on the safe side. So one thing I like to do when I know I'm going to be pouring an entire bottle of fluid into a funnel is I like to take a set of pliers, a large set of pliers, and so I'm using a gallon jug of oil because I buy this in bulk, and take it and crimp it to basically give it a little pour spout. It makes it so it comes out a little easier, you can control it, you have less drips. Okay, so once you have all the oil in the transmission, your initial amount I should say, next you just need to let the fluid settle. Right now it's probably a good amount of it's probably still in the fill tube, as well as just sitting in the bottom of the pan. You want to let the fluid have a chance to just settle and level itself out, give it maybe a minute or two, and then once you do that, you need to actually test the fluid level. To get an accurate reading, the transmission needs to be at operating temperature. Now remember the temperature gauge on the in the dash, that's showing you the coolant temperature within the motor, which is a rough approximation of what the actual motor's temperature is. That doesn't tell you what the temperature of the transmission is. They're two completely separate things. Now to get the transmission up to its normal operating temperature, you need to drive it around, run it through its gears, let the fluid flow where it needs to go. Before you actually test the transmission fluid level, you want to put the parking brake on. You want to put it into park, and then you want to go through each of the drive selectors. So put it into drive, put it into second, put it into first, put it into reverse, and put it in neutral, and let it sit for a couple seconds in between each setting. So put it into drive for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever. Put it into second for a couple seconds, put it into first for a couple seconds, and so on. Then once you've done that, put the transmission back in park, and then you can test the fluid level. On mine, there is no hashed area. It's just a section for cold and a section for hot. So you want it somewhere in this range here. This is low, and this is where you want it. So if your check of the transmission fluid shows that you need to add fluid, add about a half quart to a quart at a time. A little goes a long way. You don't want to overfill this thing. If you overfill it, however, it's not the end of the world. You can use a suction pump like I used in the beginning, to suck out any excess fluid once you get it to so you can get it back to where you need it to be. But once you've sucked that fluid out, it's useless. It's garbage. You don't want to reuse it, so you're just wasting the fluid. So you want to try to slowly bring the fluid level to where it needs to be. In addition, once you've added fluid, especially if you have to add a significant amount, you need to give that new fluid time to heat up and get up to operating temperature, just like the initial transmission fluid you added. This will take a few minutes, so you want to let it sit. You want to let it idle or drive it around for a little while just to heat it back up again. So this is a chart from the service manual for this vehicle. It's a, there you go, 2000 service manual. And it's a handy chart. It basically shows you where your transmission fluid level should be at a given temperature. So like at 180 degrees, which is normal operating temp, you want it at the top hole. If it's even higher than that, you want it just a little bit above. It's going to be expected to be there when it's in the full range. So that basically helps you test this. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I've got all the fluid back in the vehicle, and it's at the right level, at the level I want it to be. Hopefully this helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. If you want to see more videos, subscribe. I've got more videos coming down the pipe. I'm work on my own vehicles. I don't own a shop or nothing like that. So things that I do are based on things that either break or need maintenance on my vehicles, and my vehicles are 10 plus years old, all of them. So they have things they need fixing. They've always got something going on with them. So if you have any questions, please leave comments. If you liked it, click the like button and subscribe. Thanks a lot.